Imagine you're driving down the highway and suddenly your car's check engine light just flicks on,
Oh, I hate that feeling.
right? It's the worst. It's a bright, glaring red warning right there on your dashboard. And you basically have a choice in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
You can pull over immediately, which, disrupts your entire trip. You have to call a tow truck. You're sitting on the side of a loud, dangerous road.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that.
Nobody wants to do that. Or you can just keep driving.
Right. Just ignore it.
Exactly. And if you keep driving, the car still moves, the music is still playing, you completely avoid the immediate breakdown on the shoulder of the highway. But under the hood, the pistons are grinding, the oil is burning, and you're causing this quiet, long-term damage to the engine itself.
Yeah, it feels like a temporary victory, because you haven't stopped moving.
Right.
But the wear and tear is accumulating with every single mile. And I think we have this psychological tendency to think that avoiding a sudden halt means we're avoiding negative consequences altogether.
Yeah, but when you step into the world of human biology and substance use, that dashboard metaphor becomes incredibly real and often misunderstood, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome to vpod.ai. We've got a really fascinating exploration lined up for you today. But first, I need to share this. You can sponsor this podcast for just $25. Your message will be featured across major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and more. If you're interested, visit vpod.ai to get started today.
It's a great opportunity.
It really is. So we are building on our previous conversation about what happens to the body when someone suddenly stops consuming cannabis. And we received just an absolutely brilliant question from a listener.
Yeah, it was such a good point they brought up.
It was. They pointed out this huge gap in how we talk about this stuff. They asked, essentially, you only speak about what happens when use suddenly stops. What about if use does not suddenly stop?
Right.
It is not clear whether the obvious negative consequences only take place when use suddenly stops, which I thought was just a fantastic observation.
Yeah. It is, because it gets right to the heart of the confusion out there.
Exactly. So today we are combing through a massive stack of clinical research, public policy documents, medical data to find the actual answer. If someone continues using cannabis, do they avoid the negative consequences? Like, which effects are related to continued use rather than withdrawal?
It is such a vital distinction to make. And the short answer is no. Keeping the car on the highway does not hit pause on the damage.
Wow, okay, so it's still grinding.
It's still grinding. Ongoing regular use has its own distinct documented risk profile that is entirely separate from what happens when you quit.
Okay.
When we look at chronic use, the scientific data highlights pretty severe long-term impacts across several domains. First, there are significant effects on brain development, particularly regarding memory, attention, and learning.
I want to pause right there because the prevailing public narrative right now is that this is just a plant and it's mostly harmless. So how exactly is it impacting memory and learning? Like, what is the actual mechanism at play in the brain during continued use?
So it comes down to the endocannabinoid system.
Okay.
Our bodies naturally produce chemicals that regulate mood, appetite, memory, and sleep. And THC, which is the psychoactive compound in cannabis, it effectively hijacks the system.
Hijacks it.
Yeah, it binds really heavily to receptors in the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center, and the prefrontal cortex.
And that handles like decision making.
Right, exactly. Executive function and decision making. So when those receptors are constantly flooded by external THC from regular use, the brain's ability to encode new information and process complex thoughts, it just gets bogged down.
Ah, I see.
It's kind of like trying to have a nuanced conversation in a room where a heavy metal band is playing at full volume.
Oh, wow. So the natural signals are just getting completely drowned out by the THC.
Precisely. And this translates into real-world deficits. We see lower educational attainment, lower test scores, and major disruptions in that critical life transition from school into the workforce. Yeah. And the physical health risks are equally present. There's respiratory illnesses from inhaling combusted material, cardiovascular issues. And then crucially, there are the mental health and behavioral risks.
Right. Which we hear a bit about, but maybe not the full scope.
Yeah, chronic use is heavily associated with depression, psychoses, schizophrenia, and broader behavioral shifts like severe apathy and just a huge drop in motivation.
So these are all effects of the engine grinding away while you keep driving. But I have to ask about the addiction side of this because I think a lot of people assume you can't get addicted to cannabis. If someone keeps using despite these things happening, where is the line between just being, a heavy user and having an actual medical condition.
Right. Well, that line is defined clinically as cannabis use disorder, or CUD.
CUD, okay.
Yeah. This is a diagnosed condition where a person exhibits impaired control over their use, they experience intense cravings, and they continue to use despite suffering adverse psychological, medical, or social consequences. And right now, nearly 4 million people meet the criteria for cannabis use disorder.
Wait, 4 million?
4 million.
That is a massive number that you almost never hear mentioned in any public policy debates or on the news.
It is heavily overlooked. I mean, it really is. And the most concerning data point for me is the average age of onset for this disorder, which is 21.7 years old.
21, oh man.
Yeah. The human brain is still actively developing its frontal lobe until about age 25.
Right.
So we are talking about young adults at the very beginning of their independent lives, actively altering their brain's development trajectory.
Well, they should be, starting careers or finishing college.
Exactly. Yet out of those 4 million people, only about 747,000 hours actually receive treatment services for it.
That is staggering. So going back to our car analogy, continuing to use isn't a free pass. You avoid the immediate breakdown on the side of the road, which we'll call the withdrawal, but you risk long-term engine damage, the cognitive deficits, the respiratory issues, and this very real risk of cannabis use disorder.
Yeah, that is the core takeaway for the listener who asked the question. The absence of withdrawal symptoms does not equal the absence of harm.
Right.
The biological mechanisms of continued use are actively reshaping your neural pathways.
Okay, so we've established the long-term risks of keeping the car on the road. Now let's look at what happens when the car breaks down on the highway. When a regular user suddenly stops, what is physically happening to trigger negative consequences? Like, why does withdrawal happen?
So when use suddenly starts, the body goes into a specific physiological and psychological state of shock.
Okay.
To track this, clinical researchers utilize the Marijuana Withdrawal Symptom Checklist, or the MWSC. It's a 10-item questionnaire.
And what's on it?
The symptoms are craving, irritability, nervousness, depression, anger, restlessness, sleep problems, decreased appetite, strange dreams, and headaches.
Wow.
Yeah, and users rate each of these on a scale from 0, meaning not at all, to 3, which is severe.
I'm looking at that list, and strange dreams and sleep problems immediately jump out at me.
Yeah, they're very common.
Because I think a lot of listeners who have maybe taken a tolerance break or quit entirely can relate to that. But why does that happen biologically? Like, why would stopping a drug make you have bizarre dreams?
It is a fascinating biological response called REM rebound.
REM rebound.
Yeah, so when a person consumes cannabis regularly, it actually suppresses REM sleep. And that's the rapid eye movement phase where we do most of our dreaming.
Right.
The brain needs REM sleep to process emotions and consolidate memories. It's essential. So when you remove the cannabis suddenly, the brain basically says, we have a massive backlog of unprocessed REM cycles.
Yeah.
And it violently swings in the opposite direction to catch up.
So it's like a tightly compressed spring finally being released. The dreams aren't just strange. They are the brain frantically working overtime to process a backlog of data.
That is an excellent way to picture it, yeah. And that spring mechanism applies to the other symptoms as well, which comes down to tolerance and dependence.
Can you break those two down for us?
Sure. When someone uses regularly, they build a tolerance. The brain starts down-regulating its own natural production of those regulating chemicals, like anandamide, which is the body's natural version of THC.
Because it's getting from the outside.
Exactly. It expects the external supply, so it stops making its own. Dependence means the brain has now structurally adapted to rely on the presence of the drug just to function normally.
Oh, I see. So the irritability, the anger, the headaches, that isn't the cannabis causing the damage. That is the brain's internal alarm system going off because it suddenly has no chemical equilibrium.
Yes. The withdrawal checklist is essentially a map of a dependent brain struggling to find its natural baseline again.
That makes so much sense. But let me play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Go for it.
What about a weekend user? Someone who has an edible on a Friday night and just stops on Monday. They probably aren't getting the strange dreams or the headaches.
Yeah.
So can someone have cannabis-related problems without experiencing this withdrawal phase at all?
Absolutely. And this highlights the difference between acute risks and chronic risks. Okay. The weekend user might not consume enough or frequently enough to develop that physical dependence we just talked about. Right. Therefore, when they stop on Monday, they bypass the withdrawal checklist entirely. Their engine doesn't break down on the side of the road.
So they're in the clear.
Well, no, far from it.
Oh,
They are highly vulnerable to acute risks during the actual time they are using.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. For example, a naive or occasional user is significantly more susceptible to severe panic attacks or acute psychological distress, especially given modern potencies.
Right.
And of course, there's the immediate risk of impaired driving, vehicle crashes, or workplace accidents while under the influence. So avoiding sudden withdrawal absolutely does not mean avoiding the risks of use.
You just mentioned modern potencies, and I really want to dive into that because I think this is where the conversation completely shifts from what people think they know.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
Because with alcohol, the math is standardized. A beer is a beer. A shot of vodka is a shot of vodka. We know the physiological impact of a standard dose. How are researchers and doctors measuring cannabis use when everyone is using it so differently?
It is arguably the single most urgent priority for the scientific and regulatory community right now.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Establishing a standardized dose is proving incredibly difficult. The market has seen an absolute explosion of different products and delivery methods. We aren't just talking about smoking the dried flower of the plant anymore.
Right. It's everywhere now.
It is. The landscape is saturated with edibles, liquid extracts, vape pens, dabs, tinctures, and even topical lotions.
Okay, wait. For listeners who might not be familiar, what is a dab? And how is its potency different from the cannabis researchers were studying, say, a few decades ago?
Good question. So a dab is a concentrated dose of cannabis made by extracting THC and other cannabinoids using a solvent, usually like butane or carbon dioxide.
Wait, butane? Like
Yeah.
lighter fluid?
Yes. They use it to strip the THC from the plant material, resulting in a sticky oil or wax. And the difference in potency is just night and day.
Okay.
Historically, clinical data heavily focused on cannabis that contained roughly 2 to 4% THC.
2 to 4%.
Right. Today, the commercial flower available in legal markets routinely hits 24% THC or higher.
Wow.
But when you look at concentrates like dabs, the THC concentration can reach 80 to 90%.
90%. So a joint smoked in 1995 is biologically irrelevant to a dab being consumed today. The sheer volume of the chemical hitting those brain receptors is exponentially higher.
You truly cannot compare the two. They are completely different beasts. And what's crucial to understand about this high-potency market is the data skew on who is actually consuming it.
What do you mean?
Much like the alcohol industry, the vast majority of the product is consumed by a minority of the users.
Oh, I see.
The heavy users, those who are using daily or near daily, consume the bulk of the cannabis by volume. This means that the public health harms, the severe risks of cannabis use disorder we talked about, and the intense withdrawal symptoms are highly concentrated in a specific, vulnerable subset of the population.
Which makes epidemiological research a nightmare, I would imagine.
Yeah.
It's like trying to study the health effects of caffeine, but half your subjects are drinking mild green tea, and the other half are swallowing pure caffeine pills. And you're just writing down caffeine consumer for both of them.
That is a perfect analogy. That's exactly what's happening. The product innovation and the sheer potency have completely outpaced our scientific metrics for measuring it.
Which leads to a massive structural issue. Because if the doctors and the clinical researchers don't have a standardized way to measure a dose, how on earth are regulators keeping up?
They're struggling.
Like, how do you ensure public safety, say, on our roads, when you can't even scientifically define impairment for these new products?
Regulators are facing an incredibly steep uphill battle. Let's look at impaired driving as an example. With alcohol, a breathalyzer can instantly tell a police officer your blood alcohol content, right?
Right.
Because alcohol is water-soluble and it metabolizes at a very predictable linear rate. The law has a hard scientifically backed limit for impairment. But establishing that limit for cannabis is immensely complicated because THC is fat-soluble.
Meaning it stores in the body's fat cells and releases very slowly over time.
Exactly. So in Washington state, for instance, they use a 5 nanograms per milliliter threshold for THC in the blood for a DUI.
Okay, 5 nanograms.
But because of that fat solubility, a heavy daily medical user might have a baseline THC level near or even above that 5 nanogram limit before they even consume anything that day.
Oh, wow. So a chronic user might be totally functionally sober, going about their day, but test over the legal limit, while a naive weekend user could be completely incapacitated and a total danger on the road at just 2 nanograms.
That is the exact paradox law enforcement is stuck in right now. The nanogram threshold doesn't accurately reflect actual functional impairment across different types of users.
Oh, that's wild.
And it gets even more complicated when you factor in polydrug use.
Like mixing things.
Yeah, consuming cannabis simultaneously with alcohol or blending cannabis extracts with nicotine in a vape pen. Roadside testing technology is really struggling to account for how these substances interact and magnify impairment.
It's like regulators are trying to measure the volume of the ocean using a rubber ruler. The metrics just bend and distort depending on who you apply them to.
That's exactly it.
And from what I understand, this regulatory lag extends beyond impairment. It's also about how these commercial products are grown, right?
Yeah.
Specifically regarding pesticides.
Oh, yeah. This is one of the most fascinating regulatory quirks in this entire landscape.
How so?
Well, public perception generally treats cannabis use as innocent until proven guilty, assuming it's harmless until a study proves otherwise. But when it comes to the agricultural side, specifically the pesticides used to grow commercial cannabis, the regulatory mindset has to be the exact opposite. It has to be guilty until proven innocent.
Because you are dealing with a plant that is going to be consumed, burned, inhaled deeply into lung tissue, or chemically concentrated.
Yes. And right now, there are no federal guidelines on which pesticides are safe to use on cannabis because it remains federally prohibited.
Right, of course.
So individual states are left to figure it out entirely on their own. Colorado, for example, early on they had to adapt a pesticide safety list that the Department of Agriculture originally designed for leafy greens.
Leafy greens,
Yeah.
like spinach and lettuce.
Yes.
But wait, I eat a spinach salad.
Mm.
I don't light it on fire and inhale the smoke. The chemical reaction of digesting a pesticide in your stomach acid has to be entirely different than burning it.
You're exactly right. The scientific term for that is pyrolysis.
Yeah.
That's the thermal decomposition of materials at elevated temperatures. Heating a chemical actually changes its molecular structure.
Right.
So a pesticide that is perfectly safe to eat and pass through the digestive tract might become a highly toxic compound when pyrolyzed and absorbed directly through the highly permeable tissue of the lungs.
That is a staggering public health blind spot.
It really is. Furthermore, the process of making concentrates, those 90% THC dabs we discussed,
Yeah.
that process can also concentrate any residual pesticides left on the plant, so you're getting a concentrated dose of whatever was sprayed on it.
Man. So what are the states doing about this?
Well, in Washington state, they ran into so many issues with inconsistencies in pesticide testing from independent laboratories that the state had to intervene. They actually took the testing authority away from private labs and gave it directly to the state's Department of Agriculture to try and enforce a baseline level of standardized safety.
Wow, so he just took it over entirely.
Yeah. State policies are essentially acting as real-time public health interventions while the science catches up. For instance, to prevent accidental overconsumption or child poisonings, Washington limits edibles to 10 milligrams of active THC per serving.
Which makes sense.
They also require packaging to be resealable and strictly mandate that marketing cannot appeal to children, and they're actually consulting with poison control centers to design safer packaging standards.
So it's very much flying the plane while building it.
Absolutely.
Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground here today, from brain chemistry to agricultural policy. So let's bring this all back to the listener's core question and clearly separate ongoing use from sudden cessation. If a person is currently using, what are their actual options and the resulting physical realities?
We can look at this through three distinct paths. The first path is to keep using. If someone continues regular cannabis use, they are facing the long-term compounding risks. They risk altering their brain's natural endocannabinoid system, suffering impaired memory and executive function, and facing long-term physical and mental health consequences, including cannabis use disorder. You do not avoid biological harm just because you avoid stopping.
Right, you're just putting electrical tape over the check engine light while the pistons grind down. So what is the second path?
The second path is to stop suddenly. This is when the engine violently breaks down on the highway. This triggers the acute withdrawal phase. Because the brain has developed structural tolerance and dependence, suddenly removing the THC throws the system into chaos.
This is the checklist we talked about.
Yes. This is where you experience the intense cravings, the anger, the insomnia, and the RM rebound strange dreams. It is the brain scrambling to upregulate its natural chemicals.
Which brings us to a middle ground, I assume. The third path, reducing gradually.
Exactly. Gradual reduction is essentially trying to slowly decelerate the car. Any reduction in use immediately begins to lower your long-term health risks. By tapering off, you allow the brain the necessary time to slowly recalibrate its baseline and restart its own natural chemical production, which ideally softens the blow of those acute withdrawal symptoms.
So the overarching truth here, and the direct answer to our listener's question, is that the symptoms of quitting are entirely different biological mechanisms than the long-term damages of continuing. Cannabis-related health effects from ongoing use are happening quietly in the background, reshaping neural pathways, whether you ever experience a single withdrawal headache or not.
That is exactly right. And if there is one crucial thought to take away from all this data, it is that right now in the public square, anecdotes are heavily trumping science.
Oh, absolutely.
People share stories of perceived benefits or a lack of immediate harm, and society largely views the modern drug as harmless. But the reality is that the commercial industry is moving at lightning speed. They are pushing higher and higher potencies and utilizing aggressive new marketing tactics. We are looking at a population consuming highly concentrated products that the human brain has never interacted with at this scale in our evolutionary history.
Because we don't have decades of data on 90% THC concentrates, we are essentially the test subjects.
We are. We might not truly understand the population-wide health impact, the real long-term toll on our collective physiological engines for another generation.
Wow. It is so easy to ignore the dashboard warnings when everyone around you is telling you the car sounds just fine.
Very true.
Well, thank you to our listener for prompting such an important exploration into the actual mechanics of this issue. If you want to keep untangling the complex questions that shape our world, be sure to follow vpod.ai for more educational and thought-provoking conversations. Keep asking brilliant questions, and we'll keep looking for the answers.